Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. It is March 5th, the year of our Lord 2018. I am Suzanne Sherman, your host for this next hour here on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. We do have a number you can call in. We're live right now, 717-467-1736. You can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. We have a fan page also called CRN. If you don't want to call in, I always address the private messages I get during the show. You can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/Suzanne Sherman or Cowgirl Esquire. We have an app I keep forgetting to mention at the start of our shows. You can download it on the Google Play Store. It is for the Android platform only. We do not have iPhone, I'm sorry, but you can listen to us on Radio Coast Stream. And we have shows on a rotation 24/7. You can hear my show, Jeff Johnson, who's producing me this morning, and he was hosting his show. We usually go back-to-back Mondays whenever we can, and his show is called The Paradigm Shift. You can listen to that. They have a show with Daniel Bailey, the Renegade and the Rambler Radio Network. Jeff, good morning. I believe you and Daniel went on live last night, if I'm correct.
Yes, we did. We did 2 hours last night. We did our show, the Renegade and Rambler show, and then immediately following that, we did the Bailey Report, because his schedule is so weird that he had to do one last night. And it'll be posted up. It'll run during his hours. Usually he runs 6 a.m. He used to, but his schedule is just so messed up now. So anyway, and then of course we did the Paradigm Shift just before you. So hey, we're having fun. I got a little worked up last hour.
I was listening. It was a really good show. So if you missed that show, go to YouTube. You can hear that, or you can go and listen to it on the replay on our Radio Co. or on our app. And we also have other hosts as well here, other shows. We have new talent that just joined us, Justin Spears and Michael Margellis. I forget his last name, but they have a show called The Other Side. They do a fantastic job. That's also syndicated at a local show, at a local radio station in Indiana. So that's really good news. We are getting our name out. Mike Meharry from 10th Amendment Center has more podcasts that he has submitted for our listening pleasure for our listeners here. We also have the Brush Fires of Freedom show that airs live on Sundays out of Tucson, Arizona, so you can replay that as well. Go to our YouTube page. Please subscribe. Please share. If you don't listen on the Radio Co. link, you can hear your shows on demand on YouTube. You can also hear me on K-Talk Radio. That's an AM station out in the Sandy, Utah area. And if you are not in the reception area for that, have no fear, you can hear them online, ktalkmedia.com. They have a live streaming option. Also, shows are archived, so you can find me on Inside the News with Paul Jensen. I was recently on one called Shooting You Straight with Maxon and Platt. Kevin Gutzman joined us for that one. It was a fantastic show. I also put up a link. I was on Prepper Talk Radio on K-Talk Media as well, where we talked about gun rights, national reciprocity, federalism, just getting that word out. So that was a good show. That is on my Facebook page. Jeff, maybe we'll put that on the CRN pages as well. I got a little bogged down doing that last night. Want to also let listeners know Dan Fisher, who is running for governor, they had a big event this weekend. It was called Time for Justice. Dan Fisher is running for governor of Oklahoma on a platform to not regulate, but to abolish human abortion, with all the people screaming about saving the lives of children for these very rare incidents, but get a lot of events when we have a mass shooting. We have a massacre going on every single day. So if we want to save some lives, let's get real and talk about that. So we had something really positive, some positive news out of Utah this last weekend. We had an event that was covered in the Salt Lake Tribune for teachers. One of the solutions that has been proposed for dealing with these shooting incidents is arming school teachers. Now, however you feel about that, I have said from the get-go, the national government, Donald Trump, pardon my use of the N-word, Donald Trump has no business commenting on this, offering incentives to teachers to conceal carry. That's not their role. This is a local issue, a state issue, community issue. And here in Utah, the Salt Lake Tribune has a story that preschool, it starts out with a preschool teacher, Rebecca Gwaltney, thinks about the prospect of a campus shooter at least a few times every month. This is the article. And even more after the recent killings. It's always kind of in the back of your mind. Be prepared, she figures. So there was an event in, I believe it was Syracuse area. About 800 people attended a free CCW class. And the Utah Gun Exchange presented this class, and joining me right now is the founder of the Utah Gun Exchange. Nick, I want to welcome you to the show. How are you? Is he on, Jeff?
He is on, but his mic is muted. I just texted him to unmute. I can't unmute him
Okay.
on Hangout. So either he is away and unable to answer, or he I don't know. He's in here. Oh, okay. Now he's gone. He must have had an issue. He dropped. So you'll just have to run with the article for a second.
Well, I'll go with the article, and if he makes it, he makes it. We've got a ton of things to cover today. So she says it's always possible. She always needs to be prepared. And Jeff, one of the things I was saying is these events, they are tragic, and they take over the dialogue of what's going on in the news, and they are horrific. But if you think about it, they are very rare. Statistically, your risk of being shot in a school is minuscule. Just like when we have a plane crash, if you think how many planes are in the air in a year and how many actually go down, the risk when it comes to firearms and school shootings is so over-exaggerated. And we have to understand why. Well, why is that, Jeff? What do I always talk about? The trifecta of evil that is trying to control us. We have the government, we have the media, and we have the education system. And here, when it has a school shooting happens, we have all three. So we have a horrific event, and then we have the government and all three trying to say, what is the solution here? Well, clearly the only solution is to ban guns. And that's the way that makes the people turn into slaves, but that's not going to solve the problem. One of the other solutions, again, is to arm the teachers. And we've had discussions with Justin and Mike, our public school teachers from the other side, and we discussed the pros and cons of that. But now let's talk about people that are willing to educate these teachers and teach the teachers how to be prepared in the case of an incident like this. Is Nick Moyes on the line yet? Is he available to talk yet, Jeff?
Nick, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're
Perfect.
Coming through loud and clear. Nick, you are one of the co-founders of Utah Gun Exchange, and you guys recently had a very successful event. I was discussing this in the Salt Lake Tribune. Let me just get a little bit more into this article, and then I'll have you do an intro and talk about this event. About 1,000 people signed up, made this the largest concealed carry course ever taught in the state of Utah. Concealed firearms may be carried with a permit inside of all Utah public schools and universities. So this is what I find. Rather than having all schools a gun-free zone, this is something that the states and the communities should decide for themselves. Nick, tell us about your work at Utah Gun Exchange and what made you decide to have this event.
Well, we unfortunately, after Columbine, we didn't secure our schools, and it kind of blows my mind that good old Joe Biden passed some legislation back in 1990 designating all of our schools gun-free zones, and even a 1,000-foot barrier outside of them, and then did nothing to actually ensure that. So we were basically lying to our teachers and faculty and students that these were gun-free zones, and then we had 20 mass shootings at schools in the last 2 decades, and every time we scratch our heads. And Thank goodness in Utah, our teachers have been legally allowed to carry concealed since 1992. And I'm proud to say that we've had 0 school shooting deaths in the state ever since. And knowing that, and as a certified instructor myself, and I've been teaching for 7 years now, we decided to host for free on our own dime as many teachers and students, because in Utah, 18-year-olds can get a provisional permit to carry concealed. We just wanted to host a large class and see if there was any interest out there, because we'd kept hearing from CNN and the likes that teachers don't want to be armed. And that is true. There is a large percentage of them that don't want to be armed. But then there's a large percentage of them that realize that their rights don't end as they go to work. And unfortunately, the government is not stepping up to make sure that these schools are safe and secure. And I'm of the opinion that teachers shouldn't be the first line of defense. I think they should be the last line of defense. But we're not leaving them many options. And so we decided to host this class for free and see if there was any interest.
And I think this, and you apparently had a lot of interest here, and a lot of teachers don't want to be armed. Did you have any teachers that communicated to you that, I'm really not, I'm not of the belief, but perhaps maybe now my opinion is changing and this is a first step for me? Or was this kind of an echo chamber and preaching to the choir and people that were already convinced they wanted to, taking advantage of a free class?
Well, I'll tell you anecdotally, no one spoke to me directly in that regard, but I did at the beginning of the class explain to all in attendance that I started out not knowing the difference between a 9mm and a 40. So I was in their shoes, and then I asked for a show of hands. I said, how many of you in here don't even own a firearm yet? And I'm not exaggerating when I say 35 to 40% of the hands in the room went up.
You know what I find very encouraging about that is the fact that people are taking the opportunity to learn before they buy. Now, I am not one that proposes when anybody says, do you think there should be a law? No. I don't think there should be a law requiring people to train before they buy a firearm. But when you have these events that allow people to come and take a class and get educated before even purchasing a firearm, I think that is the most important step in preventing these accidental deaths that are now used in gun violence statistics. Because I also have received my NRA certification. And if you take an NRA certified class, they will absolutely make emphatically, unequivocally clear gun safety. First and foremost, never point that gun at anything you do not want to destroy. Actually, that's from Colonel Cooper, but always keep that gun fired in a safe direction. Know your target, what's beyond, always keep your finger off the trigger. These are mistakes that people that do not get training make. And to find out from you right now that many people had never had a class that took your class before they had, a firearm is very encouraging. Did you have a take like that?
Yeah, I was really impressed with these folks. I mean, the bravery and the compassion, and when I heard from other friends of mine that were instructors that were volunteers at this event to help move people through the general familiarity of handling a firearm, they said there were instances where some of these folks came through the line and their hands were shaking. They'd never held a firearm before. And I'm a huge proponent of embracing these folks, these brand new shooters that are just coming to the realization that we don't all carry a police officer in our back pocket, and that cops can't be everywhere at once to save us. And they were so courageous to be there and to be willing to forego all the stigmas that the media portrays gun owners as, to be in that class and to forego all of that and to be there to learn and take that first step. And I think that we as instructors have a huge responsibility to take these people under our wing, make sure that we move them along the gun information scale at a pace that they are comfortable with. I think too often we want to when someone shows even the mildest interest in learning about firearms or learning about self-defense laws or basic safety or fundamentals or just nomenclature, that we make them drink from the fire hose. And that's really intimidating, and it's very scary, and it's a huge jump, and we have got to do a better job of giving these folks that are interested just as much as they can chew, and encouraging them and sharing our joy and excitement about firearms, but to not be overwhelming so that they want to continue to learn more.
I will tell you how this really resonates with me, because in 2010, I did not own any firearms, and recently separated. I decided, with the gang activity increasing in California and in our neighborhood, I decided it was time to learn to be able to defend my children. They were young at the time, and I looked on the internet for my first handgun class, and it actually happened to be a class for the Utah CCW. And I didn't care. I just wanted to get some basic information on how to shoot a firearm. And I never sent in the paperwork. And yes, there was reciprocity, but I know there wasn't with California. That brings up another issue. So I never sent it in, because I figured, well, who cares? I'm never going to be in Utah anyway. And now I live here. But the point is, I had never had a class before. I found it very intimidating. I was the only female in the class, but the way it was run, and I have to say this politically, I have issues with the NRA, but the way their classes are run, you don't feel overwhelmed in these classes. They had actually a simulator of a 9mm Beretta that we could get on and shoot with afterwards. And the instructor was very impressed with my performance on that, and with the fact that I'm an attorney and I could teach the Section 3, which is the legal aspect of the legal responsibility section of the NRA personal protection inside and outside the home class. So these classes are so important in getting people comfortable with this. One thing that's interesting is this is a 4-hour class that you had, correct?
Yeah, we ran about 4.5 hours. Yep.
Yeah, and this is what I noticed, because when I took the actual concealed carry permit class for California, it was a 2-day class. And just I'm taking a little side road here, is one of the issues that's raised with national reciprocity is the disparity of training. So Utah, we have 4 hours, no live fire classes. California, two days. So this just highlights one of the incidences of why national reciprocity is a bad idea. But here, I think it was one of your co-founders in this article says that gun control won't save your kids. We live in a society where evil is pervasive, and you need to protect yourself from evil. Now, Utah Education Association officials declined to comment on Saturday's event. As we know, a lot of these union and professional organizations tend to lead heavily to banning and are not friendly towards firearms. So tell us a little bit about, I admire that you guys are recognizing the reality that evil is pervasive, and this is a common sense. This is a common sense action that we can take. How can people get into these classes? Is it for teachers only? Do you have more events coming up soon?
So yeah, we do have another class coming up on April 7th. And for this one, I believe we are going to allow educators to continue to come and take the class for free, because this last class was just the beginning, and we're going to continue to allow our teachers that want and are willing and able to carry a firearm in their classrooms to come learn from, I would dare say, competent instructors and learn the laws in a safe and friendly manner. But their spouses or immediate family members will also be able to come to the next one for a typical nominal fee that every instructor out there charges for their time. So that will be the only difference on this next one. We haven't locked down a price yet, because we want to make it reasonable. Obviously, it's the same household, it's the same pot of income, so we want to keep that in mind as we go forward. But definitely, we will continue to take care of our teachers. They're on a limited income. We don't want to pay them enough, and we for some reason don't want to even put up metal detectors or have armed guards and security. Again, I think our teachers should be our last line of defense, certainly not our first. They didn't sign up for this. So to all these locations and these facilities, gun-free zones, and then do nothing to secure them. We secure every other facility in our country that holds anything of value. Our banks, our courts, I go to Utah Jazz games and there's security at the doors and metal detectors, but we don't secure our most valuable asset, our kids. It's a big head scratcher. And people say, well, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm gonna teach our teachers for free. That's the best I can do to contribute in my community. And I certainly don't want we could create GoFundMe's and put up bulletproof aspects of the teachers' rooms or put up metal detectors. And if we got to fund this ourselves, we will. But let's start here, and this is something that we know and that there is demand for. So we're happy to provide this service.
So there's an event April 7th. And by the way, I did volunteer to assist with this, and that offer still stands. So I'm happy to be there. You and I will chat privately and work that out if you want to take me up on that offer as well. And how can people sign up? How can they get involved?
So if you just go to facebook.com/Utah Gun Exchange, all one word, we will have an event page that will be posted here probably in another week or two. And it will have all the event details, all the stipulations, and the location and the time.
Fantastic. And yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Can I ask you a question? I just want to ask a question because I'm wholeheartedly behind this this effort to educate. And like you said, 40% have never even touched a gun before. Are you connected with, not personally or your organization, are you connected enough that you have a place, a range where you can send these folks so they could maybe expand on their training a little bit and get their first opportunity to fire a firearm and to learn to do it safely on a range?
Yeah, there is no shortage of indoor gun ranges here in Utah, and there's no shortage of shooting sports competition leagues. There's just a ton of them. I mean, within 2 minutes of where we hosted this class, there's a gun range called the Armory off 90th South in Salt Lake City, and then 40 blocks south of that, there's TNT Guns and Ammo. And then you go a little bit up towards Park City, you've got the Parley Canyon Outdoor Range. Then in Park City, you've got the Park City Gun Club range. There's just a myriad, and that's four. I could keep going for days.
Yeah.
But,
what I'm just getting at is, are these teachers being kind of encouraged to go somewhere and to fire a firearm and and learn to do it safely somewhere? And number two, I mean, I'm from Pennsylvania, so it's a little bit different for me because I'm across the country from you guys, so I have no idea what goes on in Utah really. Other than, I mean, because in Pennsylvania, I can go to there's some indoor gun ranges where you can actually, just about any gun that's in their store, you can fire, and that way you can pick out a gun that actually fits you. So that's the only reason I ask these questions, because these people are new, and some of them are going to be afraid to fire a firearm. And it's great if they could go someplace where they could shoot a 22 and go low impact and learn and grow into the shooting sports.
Absolutely. And I don't want folks to hear this and say, well, yeah, Utah's concealed firearm permit course is only 4.5 hours of theory. It is. We did provide revolvers and semi-autos for every single student to handle. Every single one of them did. And there was a huge emphasis on making sure that they continue on in their training, that they take I actually asked all of the instructors present that were currently certified to raise their hands, and I said, all those people that did your fingerprints today are certified to at a minimum teach the NRA basic pistol shooting course. Go talk to them, ask them when their next class is, get their contact information, and go take legitimate training. The NRA, I'm with you. I don't agree with all the things they do legislatively, but as far as their training goes, they do a great job of certifying people on how to teach and how to teach these different disciplines and walking people through the basic fundamentals of sight alignment, sight picture, grip, breath control, stance. And those are the fundamentals that you don't really learn from, you know, that uncle who takes you out shooting with the 22s, and they don't, the average Joe doesn't know how to teach how to properly handle a firearm. So the emphasis was massive. I gave a shout out to a company out of Spanish Fork, Utah called youtactical.com. My good friend of mine, Dave Acosta, is one of those instructors that takes his time, knows his stuff, and is actually up and down the Wasatch Front right now every day teaching live fire training courses specifically for teachers. He's been running ragged the last couple weeks, as you can imagine. But yeah, the NRA Basic Pistol Shooting course is a great foundation. But going just to the range by yourself, renting a gun is such a huge leap for a lot of these people. And I highly recommend that, I mean, the women out there join a girl and a gun.org. That's a great organization for women. And there are well-armed women community. Well-armed is another one. Well-armed women community. There's a lot of groups out there that are doing wonderful work, that are taking brand new shooters through these baby steps, because I'm of the opinion that the far right, the average demographic, the age group for gun owners is males 35 to 65, right? But the only way we're going to maintain our rights in this country to have the Second Amendment as a fundamental right on par with the First Amendment, is that if we gather the masses, the folks in the middle, the far left, they're a lost cause. Quit battling with them on the internet. They're not gonna ever change their minds. But the folks in the middle who are just coming to the realization that their security and their safety is their sole individual responsibility, and it's not a collective responsibility. It's an individual one. And those are the folks that are teetering back and forth a little bit, going, do I want to learn about guns? They're kind of scary. Where do I even begin? I don't know the education. How do I get started? And hopefully that they know someone who is willing to take the time to walk them through that. And if not, they can go to nrainstructors.org and type in their zip code and find an instructor that's hosting a class nearby.
And I think these classes are a great first start, first and foremost, as I mentioned earlier, with regards to safety and proper firearms handling instruction. A lot of people, as Jeff mentioned, don't have a firearm of their own, as I did not when I first started. So I tell people, if you're not sure what you want to use, particularly women, find a range that will allow you to rent different firearms. There's no magic caliber, there's no magic brand. It's the one that you're going to feel comfortable shooting, the one you will train with. What I like also, if they hammer these points into your brain about safety, and you go out to a range with friends and other amateurs. And I've told this to people that I have taught to shoot for the first time in their lives. If anybody else takes you to a range or somewhere else and they violate any of these major rules, muzzle and trigger control, you say thank you very much and you walk away. Do not shoot with them anymore. You mentioned there were some bad firearms instructors. I actually saw some video of a line of shooters moving forward, shooting as they're walking towards a target, approaching their target. There was a guy in a wheelchair that was behind. After the shooters that were on their feet were done, they were frozen, told to stand still. The guy in the wheelchair is being pushed forward to now it's his turn to shoot. Guess who's downrange? All the other shooters. You see stuff like that, you walk away. I will say NRA certified instructors, you don't see that coming from them. The one downside that I will tell people about the NRA classes, when I was helping teach the live fire instructions for the one in California, I said, don't we have any humanoid targets here? And they said, no, the NRA does not use any human-shaped figurines. This was when I was doing. I don't know if that's changed. And the problem is, shooting blank pieces of paper doesn't teach you how to shoot human beings. I trained with Louis Auerbach. I probably have 100 hours in with him. We would start with a flat piece of paper with a figurine outlined on it. Then he would bend them so we would have the three-dimensional aspect. Then we would move on to actual mannequins themselves. I think this kind of training is going to be very important for teachers, because if there is ever a need to understand the dynamics of shooting a human being, the possibility of a round going through that human being and hitting a child, it is crucial in a school situation that they understand these dynamics, because you are more likely, this is, again, you're training for a school environment here. It's going to be different than when you're in a home, because a target-rich environment is an environment that's packed full with kids. So I think people need to be aware, if you're going to be prepared to shoot in a school, you better take some advanced defensive training. There's no such thing, in my opinion, as advanced shooting techniques, but there are tactical techniques that I think are unique to a school and public situation that these teachers should learn. So they need to continue the training. Nick, do you have any final thoughts before we move on? I want to thank you for joining me today, Nick Moyes from Utah Gun Exchange.
Yeah, a final thought maybe is to help those of us that are out there in the community talking to brand new shooters. Let's keep in mind that when we talk about helping our teachers learn about firearms, learn about safety, learn about self-defense laws, they have, this is not the picture we are painting, or the media is painting when we say arm our teachers. We're not handing out handguns, we're not handing out rifles, and we're not expecting our teachers to be clearing hallways like SWAT team members. The picture that we need to be painting is of a teacher huddled in a lockdown classroom with his or her students behind them, and if that door is violently breached, that teacher is not a human meat shield, that they have a fighting chance. That's the imagery that we need to be conveying, because that's the reality of the situation. Again, we're not asking our teachers to be SWAT team members and clear hallways and whatnot, but at the very least, we want to give them a fighting chance in those classrooms. And let's talk about, let's move the shift away from forcing our teachers to carry that responsibility. And there's protective measures that we can do and put in place in our schools to help ensure that these adults that are guarding our kids and educating our children every day, that there's things we can do that are a lot, that will be more effective and more on the front line in regards to keeping everyone safe.
Absolutely. And that's what I think people need to understand. Like you said, we're not trying to make teachers be backup SWAT team members or running down the hallway firing their weapons at somebody that's intent on causing harm. This is a last ditch scenario where they are in a classroom and they can either sit there and take these shots and watch their children die, or, as we've seen, many teachers have taken shots trying to protect children, as have other students. Or you can not be completely vulnerable, and that really is the point of all this. And that is a message that I would think all spectrums, other than the ridiculously nonsensical anti-gun that wants guns gone completely, this is better than nothing, and waiting for police officers like we saw in Parkland, Florida, standing outside waiting for the shooter to either run out of victims or bullets. Law enforcement there, the government on many levels, I'll get to that in the next segment, failed. The solution is not to ban firearms. It is common sense. Arming teachers. What should we do about these kids that are falling through the cracks, that have shown a propensity to do harm? So we're going to take a quick break. I want to thank you, Nick Moyes, Utah Gun Exchange. You can find them on Facebook. There is another concealed carry class April 7th. Go there, and I hope to see you, as I have volunteered and plan to be there myself. This is the Wasatch Report here on the Cerberus Radio Network, defending liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. We'll be right back.
Looking for a new custom camo dress or scarf? Tail Gunner Apparel. Looking for bath and body products for women and men? Tail Gunner Apparel. Looking for bed scarves and custom home products? Tail Gunner Apparel. Look awesome and feel even better. Tail Gunner Apparel on Facebook or at tailgunnerapparel.etsy.com. That's tailgunnerapparel.etsy.com.
Made love and then you cried, remember when?
Cerberus Radio Network, protecting liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the Wasatch Report. I am Suzanne Sherman here on the Cerberus Radio Network, defending liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. If you missed the last segment, I had Nick Moyes from Utah Gun Exchange on here with me to discuss an article that was in the Salt Lake Tribune. And that we discussed a class. They had about 800 showed up for a teacher's concealed carry weapons permit class. So what we're seeing here are some local level common sense solutions to how we can protect our children in the state of Utah. Teachers or people with concealed carry permits are allowed to be on school campuses. Little side note, they're not allowed to be in places of worship, which is insane, but a topic for another show. We mentioned also Joe Biden's 1990 school gun-free zones, ban on guns even within 1,000 feet of schools. And that brought forth a landmark case called the United States versus Lopez. And I'm just going to digress a moment just to show you what lengths these people will go to justify these anti-gun and top-down draconian restrictions on firearms. Now, the Gun-Free Zone Act for schools required that you couldn't even prohibited having a firearm with even 1,000 feet of a school. What this meant was that they had to utilize local law enforcement to enforce a federal law. And if you go to 10thamendment.com, Mike Meharry actually has some podcasts and articles about anti-commandeering, meaning you cannot have the federal agencies require community law enforcement to enforce national policies. So United States versus Lopez, what they tried to do, the United States argued, Attorney General argued that the Commerce Clause of all things, I guess, Jeff, this is one of the good and plenty clauses, the Commerce Clause justified the Gun-Free School Zone Act. Here was the justification. We actually studied this in law school because children would be fearful in an environment where there were firearms. They would not be able to adequately learn their lessons. If we had children that couldn't learn because they felt unsafe because of guns, we would be turning out uneducated workers who would be bad for commerce. This is how ridiculous they will stoop, how low they will stoop, how ridiculous their arguments will be to justify anti-gun policies. Fortunately, this did not stand. So, Jeff, have you ever heard about that? The Commerce Clause to justify no guns in schools, because apparently all schools will be all children will be terrified and they will not learn. So,
no, I had never heard that. That one was new, and I was sitting here shaking my head as you were saying that. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. How does schools have anything to do with interstate commerce? Oh, they're going to be workers someday. And oh my gosh.
Yeah, when they graduate to become our tax chattel.
That is so, I mean, you have to convolute so much to get to that point.
Well,
you can equate that.
An extension of Wickard v. Filburn, where this farmer growing his own wheat for his own consumption that will never leave his property, let alone the state, had an affectation of interstate commerce, and that was upheld by the Supreme Court. I want to turn our attention, before I get to bogged down in this, is school to mass murder pipeline. Ann Coulter had a great article about this in freedomsback.com. I found this article. This came out March 1st. And what she says here was Nicholas Cruz's psychosis ended in a bloody massacre, not only because of the stunning incompetence of Broward County Sheriff's Department, it was also the result of liberal insanity working exactly as it was intended to. Now, let me remind people that this is the county that is part of Debbie Wasserman Schultz's constituency. And we have seen Sheriff Israel with Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, and let's see, Joe Biden. So we know where they're going with this, that these people we have a failure here of the local community, law enforcement, government, school and law enforcement. Going back to the articles, officials knew Cruz was a ticking time bomb. They did nothing because of deliberate, willful, bragged about policy to end the school to prison pipeline. This is a feature of the story. And I had mentioned this last week as well. They came up where they were not going to report crimes because they did not want to have bad statistics, and it would have affected their grant money. And Coulter continues, if Cruz had taken out full-page ads in the local newspapers, he could not have demonstrated more clearly that he was a dangerous psychotic. He assaulted students, cursed out teachers, kicked in classroom doors, started fistfights, threw chairs, threatened to kill other students, mutilated small animals, pulled a rifle on his mother, drank gasoline, and cut himself, among other red flags. Over and over again, the students at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School reported his terrifying behavior to the administration, including Kevin Greenleaf, security specialist, and the head of the junior ROTC. At least 3 students showed school administrators Cruz's near constant messages threatening to kill them. I am going to enjoy seeing you down on the grass. I'm going to watch you bleed. I am going to shoot you dead, including one that came with a photo of his guns. They warned school authorities that he was bringing weapons to school. They filed written reports. When I was practicing law in the state of California, there was a charge. There was a felony called terrorist threats. That meant you threatened somebody and there was not a condition attached to it, meaning I am going to kill you if you don't stop or do something. That's a conditional threat. An unconditional threat is what we're seeing here. Threatening to kill someone, Ann Coulter saying in the article, is a felony. In addition to locking Cruz away for a while, having a felony record would have prevented him from purchasing a gun. Well, as we know, these people the criminals are still going to get the gun. So I'm not going to get into that right now, but I think this whole thing of prohibited classes is stupid because it's just going to ensnare people that are law-abiding otherwise and not a threat to others. And as we see here, Cruz was a threat and still didn't fall within that category. All the school had to do was risk, I love this part, was risk Cruz not going to college and depriving Yale University of a Latino class member by reporting a few of his felonies, and there would have been no mass shooting. But he was never arrested. He wasn't referred to law enforcement. He wasn't even expelled. Instead, he was just moved around from school to school, 6 transfers in 3 years, but he was always sent back to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in order to mainstream them so that he could get a good job someday. The moronic idea behind the school to prison pipeline is that the only reason so many Black and brown bodies are in prison today is because they were disciplined in high school, diminishing their opportunities. End the discipline and the problem will be solved. Jeff, do you remember Obama actually had I guess it was a decree where he did not want the schools punishing the Black students as much. So, but they still needed, I guess, a quota of school punishment. So it was going to fall upon Asian and white kids to fill that and be punished. I remember something about that. And it just goes to the insanity of, where quotas and statistics mean more than reality and actually solving problems. So like the Wizard of Oz in reverse, Ann Coulter says, the wizard told the scarecrow, you don't need an education, you just need a diploma. The school to prison pipeline idiocy tells students you don't need to behave in school, you just need to leave with no criminal record. Killjoys will say something that removing the consequences of behavior only encourages more bad behavior, but that's not the view of the learned professionals who took summer courses at Michigan State Education School. She says in a state of genius, they realize that the only problem criminals have is that people keep lists of their criminal activities. It's the list that prevents them from getting into MIT, where they will one day cure cancer. What we're seeing, Jeff, is just this denial of the reality that these kids need to be treated like they should be objectively, rather than paying attention to the demographic role that they have and how it will affect their statistics. So she says here, say in the middle of the drive to cut back the arrest or expulsion of students of color, this was what I was mentioning earlier, how should the school have dealt with a kid named Nicholas Cruz? Might there be some connection between his last name and the school's abject refusal to do anything about his repeated criminal behavior? Superintendent of Broward County Public Schools, Robert Runcie, was actually bragging about how student arrests had plummeted under his bold leadership. Well, now what she's saying here, and I'd mentioned this as well, this wasn't student arrests because of change in their behavior. It was student arrests because of how the schools and local law enforcement were addressing such behavior. When we discussed on a show, I believe it was last week, that police were also hiding evidence of these crimes in collusion with the schools. Again, what was the purpose for? To get more federal money. Just like what we talked about with these schools being drugged with ADHD drugs, with these kids being designated as having special needs and putting on these medications, they get more money. So these were all parties to an agreement going back to the school that ensured Cruz would be out on the street with full actual access to firearms. And she lists them here. Robert Runcie, superintendent of the schools; Peter Weinstein, chief judge of the 17th Judicial Circuit; Michael Statz, state attorney; Howard Finkelstein, public defender; Scott Israel, Broward County Sheriff; Franklin Adderley, chief of the Fort Lauderdale Police Department; Wansley Waters, secretary of the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice; Marsha Ellison, president of the Fort Lauderdale branch of the NAACP and the chair of the Juvenile Advisory Board. Nick Cruz may be crazy, but the parties to that agreement are crazy too. They decided to make, this is Ann Coulter, they decided to make high school students their guinea pigs for an experiment based on a noxious ideology. The blood of 17 people is on their hands. So clearly, Jeff, what we see here is a failure of multiple government organizations. And the solution they come up with now that is being presented in the House of Representatives, the United States Congress, is a ban on semi-automatic assault rifles. Is there any nexus other than that is the tool by which this lunatic used? In light of all of these failings on a multiple of levels, this is what they come up with. And the government has created the problem. They failed. They refused to accept responsibility. Government's going to come up with more laws to ensnare law-abiding citizens, ban guns. There is no nexus between the activity, the failures, and solving this problem. Jeff, you were really fired up this morning, I could tell. And can you explain, do you think that this law is actually going to pass? It's in the House right now.
At this point, I have no real feeling on this. I suspect it's going to die in the House or the Senate, but I just don't know at this point, because the fact of the matter is, this government has to disarm us. That's the only way they can finish off getting total control of the populace. They have to. So at some point, one of these is going to go through. And Daniel and I talked about it last night. When I said to him, "Listen, if you read the legislature, legislation. Again, for you English-speaking folks out there, you'll find that any semi-automatic pistol that holds more than holds 11 or more rounds, has 10 is the magic number. If it holds more than that, it's banned. If you have a shotgun that has an extended tube on it that holds 11 or more shotgun shells, or 10 more than 10, it's banned. So this isn't assault rifles. And when it really comes down to it, this Nicholas Cruz used 10-round magazines. That's all he had was 10-round magazines. So he didn't even have high-capacity magazines. So this whole magazine ban is just a fake argument anyway as well.
Well,
so,
I was just going over a little bit of that this morning, and what I'm seeing too, any of these magazines, they're talking about high capacity, anything more than 10 is going to be prohibited. You won't even be able to give them away. You can't transfer them. So if you have a gun collection and magazines over, and these banned weapons, you can't even leave them to your family members. I've said this time and time again. It is a matter of time. It's a waiting game. So what they're going to do, wait for, first of all, for these veterans to die off. They're going to indoctrinate the kids against firearms. And then, like we talked about with the Agenda 21 ideologies, then they're going to ensnare these kids that have been put on ADHD and whatever drugs and have them be part of the mental background check and put them in as a prohibited class. Now, okay, if you have parents that have firearms, guess what? When they die off, you can't pass those on. So what happens? Do your kids become felons, or do they surrender now these illegal weapons? So it's just one more way of how they just march towards disarming us, one law at a time. It's like boiling the frog slowly, heating up that pan. And before you know it, it's too late. Look what happened. Venezuela had a full ban on firearms in 2012. Look how well they're doing. Fee.org has an article out. This came out in October after the Vegas shooting. But here's something else that people aren't really discussing. We're talking about arming teachers, and actually students over 18 as well. So arming teachers, securing the schools, and we've also talked about the drugs, the schools themselves, the nature of the schools themselves. But let's look a little bit at the drug war. And there was an article out by Thomas Eckert. Gun violence would plummet if we just called off the gun war. The news outlets, I'm going to read here from the article for a moment. News outlets and politicians currently promulgating their agendas would like you to believe that every public venue in America carries an overt risk of involving you in the next mass shooting. The truth is quite different. But really, Jeff, when does the truth matter to the mainstream media, the politicians, or the entertainment industry? There has been an average of 32,000 gun fatalities in America each year from 2003 to 2010. 63% were suicides and accidents, leaving 11,000 homicide, of which 13% were gang-related. Of the remaining, victims of mass shootings made up 1.5%, equating 0.1% of all gun deaths and 0.3% of all homicides. If you take this into consideration, now this is really disproportional. Their reaction is quite disproportional to the statistics, but that's really how they roll. Now, if we are to believe the intentions, the article continues, of those pushing for an end to gun violence, it should be glaringly obvious that focusing on mass shootings, an issue that is responsible for 100 times fewer deaths than gang-related homicides, is an illogical way of achieving their goal. The immediate and long-term effects of ending the war on drugs would have a significant impact on the number of gun fatalities across the board. The most immediate of these would result from reducing the number of people who are imprisoned for victimless crime, thereby drastically cutting the number of children who grow up in single-parent households. What we're hearing a lot of, Jeff, is how a lot of these kids don't have fathers. Their fathers are either locked up, they're gone. We've discussed the breakdown of traditional family values, another byproduct of Agenda 21. And this is something we need to address as well. The breakdown of our families, of our values, and looking at how many of these imprisonments for nonviolent crimes are putting these fathers in jail. What this article continues saying is currently 46% of our federal prison populations consist of nonviolent drug offenders, while a massive 70% of gang members grow up in broken homes. Even if only 5% of those who are currently imprisoned for drug crimes return to have a positive impact on their families, that's over 100,000 fewer recruits for the gangs across the country. Jeff, when I was working in the criminal justice system as a defense attorney in California, I would go into these prisons, and it was amazing to see how many of them were in there for drugs. We need more room for the violent offenders that we see are running around. But here, let me get back to this really quick because I know we're running out of time. The drug war has created an endless cycle whereby people unnecessarily are thrown in prison, often leaving children behind to grow up impoverished and in single family or single parent households, far more susceptible to join gangs and ending up in prison, perpetuating this generational cycle. Decreased drug traffickings and mass shootings would not only would ending the drug war break the cycle of poverty and subsequent gang recruitment, it would vastly cut into what has become the primary mechanism for gangs, and that is drug trafficking. Drug trafficking brings in $750 billion in the United States each year. Much of that money goes to gangs, which have immersed themselves from start to finish in creating, smuggling, and selling drugs throughout the country. If you purchase drugs in any major city in the US, chances are they have passed through a gang at some point. So if you're still set on combating mass shootings, ending the drug war would have a positive impact there as well. Many of the recent mass shooters in America were prescribed psychotropic antidepressants before going on their rampage. This type of medication has a well-documented history of causing hostility and homicidal ideation. Please, if you have not heard it, go back to February 21st, my interview with Dr. Marianne Block of the Block Center, where she discusses the nexus between the psychotropic drugs, which are often prescribed, overwhelmingly prescribed, absent any medical testing, but based on subjective impressions of the teachers and the parents. Doctors will spend a few minutes going over some of these reports and then prescribe these very dangerous medications. Opening up, so let's see, most of these Americans don't realize the positive impact that ending the war on drugs would have on gun violence. It would make it unlikely that we will see this gain traction in any meaningful way. Our politicians' fetish for solutions that criminalize nonviolent citizens guarantees that an ineffective solution that exerts more government control, this is what I say all the time, government incompetence results in tragedy, which results in more government control and more infringement upon our liberties. They will choose to prey on the people's emotions by shifting the focus towards these sensational stories, just as we see today. And what we're seeing, and this isn't just the left, this is both sides. Why else would they send Dana Lesh, or Resh, whatever her name is, on a suicide run at a CNN town hall meeting? Well, why would they? So they could record it, see her getting screamed at, put it on all of their promotions, and promote the NRA. The NRA is just as guilty in profiting from these shootings as the politicians are. They all have their agenda. Here, what we want to do at the Cerberus Radio Network is give you the truth, so we can have some common sense, realistic discussions that are deeper than the analysis you're going to hear on the mainstream media, where they have to cut to a break every minute. You just don't hear what we're trying to tell you here. So I want to thank you. Jeff, do you have any parting comments before we end it for today?
No, ma'am. Great show.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I want to thank Nick Moyes for joining me today. Check out UtahGunExchange.com. Also, go to Dan Fisher for governor. Check him out. They had a fantastic Time for Justice rally or presentation this weekend. We will get back to you soon. I am Suzanne Sherman here on the Wasatch Report over at the Cerberus Radio Network, defending liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny.